Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Victor Manibo, author of The Sleepless, published by Erewhon. It'll be released in a few days on August 2nd. It's his first novel. The Sleepless is set in a near future, which seems almost like today. It's hard to write science fiction because we're kind of living in the future. And we find ourselves in Manhattan, where a good amount of its citizens, actually worldwide, billions, have lost the need for sleep. And that loss has inspired other losses and gains. Also, in a murder mystery, integral to this story, has lots of links to the hyper insomniacs. And a journalist spends his 24-hour quotidian life trying to uncover the truth behind his boss's murder, at the same time when business machinations are behind a convoluted, proxy battle of sorts, while our protagonist deals with, or tries to, some arcane and serious symptoms of his own related to the unusual aspects of his waking life. Got to be careful about spoilers here.
Yeah.
All of his life. So welcome, Victor, and thanks for joining us today.
And thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you about The Sleepless. I do have to point out, though, that the release date has been moved because, supply chain issues. It's now going to be on August 23rd. So it's only a few more weeks.
Yes, I'll get the book, and then, it always says do not open until midnight, whatever. But I always
Right.
open early. But I think I'm gonna get arrested. I'm not sure.
I'm sure it's fine. You'll probably get it next week, but we'll see.
So how much sleep do you get?
You know what? Today I got 6 hours, which is my average. In my day job, I am a lawyer. Thankfully, I'm the kind of lawyer who works regular 9 to 5, not, those corporate types who work 70-hour weeks. And so 67 hours is my average, and I can function on that. But it always feels like there are weeks when I'm thinking, God, I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish I didn't have to sleep. And then that's really the genesis of the book.
Yeah, it's funny because I did medical negligence cases, plaintiff size, for about 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And when you're in a 2-week trial, you basically don't get any sleep at all. And I thought about that a lot because I was thinking, am I being more productive by doing this or less? And then I never need makeup sleep like a lot of people do,
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, I go back to my normal schedule. So I thought about that a lot because in the beginning, when our protagonist when Jamie begins to embark on this journey of sleeplessness, he's talking about all the talents he's gained, whether it's Taekwondo or learning Spanish or something like that. And I realized if that happened to me, I would just chill out like I do anyway, read a few books, eat more.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think you'd actually take the extra time to do something valuable?
I think I would go through an ebb and flow with my level of productivity in terms of the hobbies that Jamie takes on. For example, in the book, he does taekwondo, does gardening, does all sorts of things to just fill up his days and nights. And I think in the beginning it's more active, and then he feels like, okay, this is too much. Maybe I should do something more passive, watch TV, binge on some movies, or finish an entire body of work by an author that he loves. I probably would go through the same ebb and flow of okay, this is too active. I can't, do karate and dragon boat racing and whatever else. I need to have some downtime. What's been interesting with talking to people about this premise is everybody has their own ideas of how they would use it. In Jamie's case, he used it mostly for self-enrichment for his hobbies. And even then, when I talk to folks and well, I asked them, what kind of hobbies would you pursue? Would you pursue new ones? Would you devote yourself to the ones that you already have? Um, I have a lot of writer friends, and I asked them, would you be writing more? And unfortunately, the resounding answer is hell no.
Yeah, a lot of writers tell me I hate to write. I go, well, what are you doing it for? I can't help it. I have to.
Right.
Um, yeah, and then sometimes he just does his jumping jacks, or like me, tries to meditate, but then can't. Um, I was going to ask you a question because I have a follow-up question, and of
Hmm.
course, I got to be careful through the whole interview that because it's a mystery, so I got to be careful with
Sure.
spoilers. And I can think of a couple. But let's talk about what I was saying at the outset about it's really hard to write science fiction now
Mhm.
because if you go way out there, it's almost impossible to think what could I possibly imagine? So talk a little bit like I interviewed this woman last week who works for Meta, Facebook, and she's head of the Oculus Quest program.
Mhm.
And she's talking about virtual reality like it is here. So talk about the visor and how the
Mhm.
visor works in this world of the future.
Sure. So, in the world of the sleepless, there are tech companies who have visors that work mostly like Google Glass, which is a technology that came out, I want to say 5 years ago, but just didn't pick up steam because consumers weren't really into the idea of augmented reality on their faces or like in their eyeballs, right? But it basically functions like Google Glass, where it's constantly connected to you via your eyes and by voice, and it feeds you information as you demand it. And for Jamie's purposes as a journalist, it also has a very specific application in that he uses it to record what he needs to report on generally. Um, it's interesting to um, write near future science fiction because, as you were saying, um, sometimes the technology is already here. In this case, when I wrote The Sleepless, which was in 2017, Google Glass was fairly new. I wasn't really thinking that it would blow up, but I saw the possibilities with it. So I took it. And then, the adoption rate for the technology isn't as good as I thought it would be. Um, but I thought, okay, it's still important, at least to the story, to have the sense of permanent connectivity that's something short of like a brain implant where you're hooked up to the internet.
Yeah.
One of the major themes of the book is, um, you know, kind of I touch a little bit about the surveillance state, or at least the widespread surveillance that a lot of corporations exercise over the public. So I thought this technology was important to keep in there, even though Google Glass wasn't that huge of a technology.
Well, it's funny. What do we set in 2046?
This is 2043 to 2046.
So really, you're not giving yourself much of a break. But then I was thinking, when you're talking about robo taxis, I'm thinking to myself, oh, we already have those. But then I realized we don't have those. And there's like this professor at the University of Pennsylvania says we'll never have autonomous vehicles because there are just too many variables. So actually, people in their minds probably think, oh yeah, we already have these autonomous vehicles, but we don't.
Right.
We think we have them, but we don't
Yeah.
have them. So
Yeah.
maybe in your 20 years that we move forward, we actually will have those. So in essence, I'm wrong. You're right. You're writing about things we don't have yet, but we kind of feel in our heart of hearts that we actually do.
Right. And with Google Glass and also with autonomous vehicles, the technology is there. It's more what the public's perception is on that technology, whether the public sees it as something that would benefit them on their day-to-day lives. With augmented reality visors, people probably thought, well, I have my phone. I don't need something that sits, on top of my eyes. With autonomous vehicles, it's probably a question of ethics. Probably a question of control. Probably a question of independence, and just a sense of safety in using a vehicle that where you might have zero control over. So yeah, I think with near future sci-fi, there's always going to be technologies that are either here already or are close to being here, just aren't adopted for not just technological reasons, but for public safety reasons or public perception reasons.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really tough to do is like the corporations that's trying to take over um, Simon's corporation, we'll get into all that,
Hmm.
um, is Zephyrus,
Hmm.
which it's so hard to think of names because like there's a computer, there's an Asus Zephyrus computer that's really fast. And I think maybe you thought of it as, it's the Greek god, I guess, of the West Wind or something like that. But
Right.
it's really hard to come up with a name now, you can come, it's like trying to get a domain. It's almost impossible.
Absolutely. And the thing with you know, naming corporations is there are so many startups and they all pick the coolest sounding, most high-tech sounding names, and everything almost feels like it's taken. With Zephyrus, the corporation, one of the corporations in the book, that actually came out of the backstory for the company where I was looking for ships, names of ships, because I wanted this corporation to start out as a shipping um, um, business, and I wanted something that existed in the 1800s. And I thought, okay, this sounds like a cool. It's a real ship that existed with the Royal Navy, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna use this. This seems like it could be a corporate name, something that they kept for like the last 200 years, and also it's not something that's used by or isn't a name of an actual corporation right now. So there you
Yeah,
go.
and that's funny because I looked it up and it's God of the West Wind, so it was prevailing wind for the ship back then. That's cool.
Right.
I didn't even think of that.
I thought so
Um,
too.
yeah. All right, let's try to sell the book. I always veer off, and so you gotta rein me back in. But I
Sure.
could I could ask you like they would ask you on Good Morning America, someone who hasn't read the book, they might just say, "What's your book about?" I kind of said in the introduction, but why don't you tell, this is where a spoiler would occur. You
Hmm.
could tell how this plague, if you will, or whatever, salvation, whatever you want to call it, how did it start? And then if you want to amplify on some aspects of it, you can, but you don't have to, like our protagonist, Helen. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to be really careful not to spoil anything. But so the Sleepless takes place in a world 20 so years in the future where a pandemic has caused a portion of the population to not require sleep. They don't require sleep at all, and it doesn't have any negative side effects physiologically or psychologically. And in the book, in the history of the book, or at the events as they were unfolding in the book, we are 10 years into the pandemic. We know some things about um, how sleeplessness works and how it doesn't. But there are still open questions. There's still not settled science on how the pandemic originated. And in terms of transmission, that's still kind of a fuzzy question. It's not something that I wanted to um, really get into the nitty gritty of in the book because I thought, I wanted the focus to be on the sleeplessness itself and how it changes um, the world and its institutions and our relationship with work, our relationship with productivity in our own daily lives. So I wasn't really interested in, okay, so what caused the pandemic? How did it spread? And how fast did it spread? And there are a lot of plague books or zombie books who um, take some time and research into that. And for me, I wanted to center it on the more capitalistic themes of what a sleepless world would be like in if our world was like that, or at least part of our population was like that. Now, in the 10 years since the pandemic has started, um, the attitudes about sleeplessness have also shifted. In the beginning, because it was this condition that seemed to come out of nowhere and is unexplained in terms of its origin, just spread, and so there was fear about, well, what what is this? What are the possible long-term and medium-term side effects? At least that was what happened in the early days of the pandemic, but um, eventually the world learned that okay, there are no side effects, but that still took a little bit of time, right? For pandemics as the one that we're going through right now, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of gaps in our knowledge. There's a lot of misinformation as well. So, 2-3 years into the COVID pandemic, there's still a lot of questions, and attitudes are shifting and are still unstable. At least in the book where our story begins, 10 years in, the attitudes have kind of taken a shift into okay, we're kind of cool with sleeplessness. It doesn't seem to have any side effects. It just makes you not need sleep, and it grants you certain benefits in terms of you have more time. You have essentially a third of your life back, that you're not spending in sleep. So um, by the time the book opens, that is the prevailing attitude, and also that is kind of the attitude that our lead character takes towards sleeplessness. The Jamie is sleepless. He is newly sleepless, but he has kind of caught up to the attitude of the rest of the world, which is no one's panicking, no one's worried about it anymore. No one's really fearing that it's gonna cause you to die earlier, or it's going to cause your bones to disintegrate at some point after like 10-15 years. Those aren't the concerns anymore. The concerns are more okay, uh, I got this condition. I don't know how I got it, but now I have it. How am I going to order my life? How am I going to you know change how I spend my day? How am I going to change the way I work and live and spend time with my family?
It's funny. I don't know if readers will think about this, but it sounds like you started writing this 3 years before COVID.
Yeah, I started writing it at the end of 2017, and it was interesting to have to revise it during the start of COVID, and then having to send it out to people, to industry professionals who may or may not be in the mood to read something that had the word pandemic in it.
So, moving on to like, if you look at the relationships that our guy has, so there's some that are sexual, some that are romantic, some that are just day to day, like I said, quotidian relationships. But the one that I thought was the most interesting was Hannah, simply because it seemed like, well, he has two different women who have completely different relationships. One that he likes to hang out with, it's cool. And the other one he's in love with, but he kind of screws it up. And then she's kind of like, I kept thinking, wait a minute, they should, maybe they should. I don't want to spoil anything again.
Yeah.
But, I really liked her.
I,
She,
I, yeah, I liked her too, and I think she was, a very strong character who knew herself, who was very secure in herself. She is a scientist, not in the field of medicine, so doesn't really help Jamie in terms of like his sleeplessness. But she is a very secure, independent woman who can call Jamie out on his, part of my language, on his bullshit. And and when I was drafting the the book in its initial stages, I wanted that romance to be a little stronger and front and center, because I really like the character. I think you're responding to her in the same way that I was, um, but because she also provided an interesting balance to Jamie, who in certain parts of the book seemed a little like indecisive, or filled with ennui. Meanwhile, we have Hannah, who's just like headstrong, knows what she wants, and can kind of steer Jamie into the right path. But as you mentioned, Jamie does mess up this relationship, and in ways that are very integral and connected to his sleeplessness and how he became sleepless. In it, as I was saying in earlier drafts, I wanted it to be more front and center, but I found that it was kind of muddying Jamie's emotional journey with himself and reckoning with the decisions that he made throughout the book. I feel like that needed to be something that he explored on his own. And to not to say that Hannah complicated things, but she did. She would have had certain ideas of how Jamie should approach his grief, his trauma, or how he should have approached um, dealing with the onset of his sleeplessness.
You know, the other way I'm dysfunctional in interviews is I kind of like want to tell you what your book is about. So,
Oh,
but I can't.
please.
No, I can't. That's a, like I said, this is a tough one. But okay, so I'll let you go. But all I'm going to say is, and you can talk about whether you want to talk about it. Jamie has this previous trauma, which
Hmm.
comes into play as well. So from there, why don't you just tell the story and get it out of the way so I don't keep bugging you with it?
Sure. Pretty early on in the book, we discover that Jamie has a very close relationship with his first cousin, Paolo. They're pretty close in age and they have pretty similar personalities. They grew up together, and Jamie, always looked up to Paolo. Paolo was smart, he was social, he was, firing on all cylinders. He's like kind of an ideal man, a perfect guy. He's a good person. He has all these amazing traits, but he was also a workaholic, and eventually he also becomes sleepless. At least this is before the events of the book, and then unfortunately, Paolo takes his own life for reasons that Jamie himself is trying to understand and untangle during the course of the book. And his trauma and his grief and his guilt in relation to Paolo's death is something that propels a lot of his decision making in terms of how he um, becomes sleepless, on how he chooses to disclose his sleeplessness to the people around him, his family, Hannah, his ex fiance, and to the people at work. And also, Paolo's death impacts how Jamie approaches the murder mystery at the center of the book, which is the death of his boss Simon, who is also his mentor and kind of a father figure to him.
Okay, leading you on then, tell us what you want to tell us about the morning when he goes in and the evening before when whatever.
Oh, you mean are we
Well,
talking about Paulo's death
no, no,
or
no, about Simon.
assignment?
When the
Oh,
morning of and all that.
I mean,
I don't know.
it to
I
me it was just this is Jamie re-experiencing something that's really traumatic in his life, right? He um, saw his cousin, somebody very important to him, take his own life, and then a couple of years later, um, he kind of witnesses the aftermath of another death that appears to be a suicide, which is his boss Simon. So I was definitely drawing a parallel to that and to how Jamie, who hasn't really, um, you know, kind of dealt with directly with his grief about Paolo's death, um, now has to kind of re-experience that in the death of his mentor and another person who's important in his life.
don't think it would be unfair to ask you to talk a little bit about the potential merger and also the the fa- this the circumstances that arise due to the death and apparent suicide of Simon. You can go ahead and do that, I think.
Sure. So Simon is the head of CNP Media, which is, you know, multinational news corporation that Jamie works for. Simon himself is kind of a CEO. He's kind of the figurehead, but he's also trying to stay true to his investigative journalism roots, and so he runs his own investigative journalism show where Jamie is a producer. Now, near the beginning of this book, we discover that CMP is targeted or wants to be acquired by a corporation named Zephyrus, which is a mega corporation that has been gobbling up all sorts of different tech and media and energy corporations. It's kind of like, you could analogize it to Amazon. I definitely did, or to Google. And so Zephyrus is coming in trying to buy this corporation and that Simon has built, and that Simon really obviously feels strongly for. And because Simon is painted in this, like kind of, even though he is um, the head of a news agency, a big news agency, he's still trying to at least maintain his journalistic independence. So he's like, I'm not going to be bought out by this like Amazon type corporation. And that's kind of the context during which Simon's death occurs. He dies in the weeks leading up to an offer from Zephyrus being voted on by his board of directors. And obviously, as one of the top people in the corporation, Simon's vote matters, and Simon's death kind of changes the dynamic in terms of whether or not that offer from a predatory corporation gets accepted or not.
Do you think, when I first started this, I thought, do you think people would really be as have this animosity towards this new class of people? Like I said, it's, like a quarter of the world's population. Do you think it would really be something that people would take sides on? And then I realized, we're living in a country right now where civil discourse has essentially gone by the wayside. And so it became much more real to me. First, I thought, no, they won't, no one's going to mind. And then I realized, at the worst, you have QAnon people who would, suggest it was the mark of the devil or whatever. What do you think? Do you think the way you've portrayed it is what would happen?
I think definitely, given the state of events, how we've approached COVID, how we are currently approaching in some parts of the country, how we're approaching monkeypox, how the country has historically approached HIV and AIDS in the 80s. There is no bound to um, the worst actors' imaginations and willingness to use a disease as a way to vilify a class of people for whatever reason. In during the HIV and AIDS crisis, it was because of homophobia. In Sleeplessness, not to draw a parallel, but in Sleeplessness, the reason is because they're different, because they are seen to gain certain advantages, especially during the events of the book, where more and more sleepless folks are getting better jobs or getting hired more, getting paid more because they have more time, because they can improve themselves, they can, take classes and all that. So I definitely think that there will be a lot of division if sleeplessness actually happens. In drafting this book, or in actually in the revision phase during the pandemic, it definitely helped to see a lot of the factions and see, okay, well, how would the health community react how to sleeplessness? And I thought, well, how did the health community react to COVID-19? How did white supremacists, how did racists, how did um, just public health advocates. So in many ways, the experience of living through COVID-19 helped me work out those different points of views and portray them in the book. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in the news is I think what's going to happen if sleeplessness comes to pass.
Well, it's funny you mentioned monkeypox because, well, first of all, it's a horrible name. It should,
I agree.
it should be, it should be like the summer slump or something, something pleasant. But the problem is Fox News is already doing exactly what you said. They're already saying it's a gay disease and it's
Right.
because of promiscuousness and all that, just like they did with AIDS.
Hmm.
And they'll
And
run with it. It'll become an issue.
it will, and I am personally afraid. I am a gay man, and this is, you know, this is something I've only read about. Again, with the HIV/AIDS crisis, and now I'm like, oh, now we're seeing it unfold. Just today, I saw a news item about um, the first cases of children getting monkeypox, and some right-wing news outlets linking that to contact with gay men. And the implication is pedophilia, which is like obviously baseless. But they're making those links, and that's very scary and very dangerous. And yeah.
I mean, we're screwed anyway, but it seems like all these issues come up. What's good happening to the liberal Democrats? There hasn't been anything good. I've been asking everyone, have you, people have heard me do this. I say
Mhm.
to people, what can you tell me good that's happened in the past 6 years? And the only thing I can think of is Wordle. That's it. I can't think of
I
anything
mean,
else.
I agree with you. Wordle is the first thing I do when I get up in the morning while my coffee's
Okay.
brewing. So
Yeah, I had a streak of 4-3, did it in 3 tries, and then today was a tough one because I knew they were going to use a double letter. Why didn't I think of that?
yeah, today was a tough one. Every time they use a double, I'm like, ah.
I know. It's funny because, talk about like algorithms and going back to the book, trying to tie it back to the book so we can sell it. You kind of predict now. You go, oh, what are they thinking? You're not thinking of the word itself. You're thinking of what are they thinking when they make the word in order to make it difficult for you to guess, which is a completely different thing than the word itself.
Absolutely. I think that be- Wordle is a free game, right? And anything that's free online means that it's the consumer, it's us paying for it. Whoever is running Wordle, the New York Times and its owners, are getting something out of it. They're testing people and how they think and how they associate words. They're getting a lot of information just on our daily habits. I mean, now the New York Times knows that, like, at 7 so in the morning, Victor Manibo plays Wordle, um, and that's something that I'm always wary of. Something that I really wanted to also kind of touch on in the book. With science fiction, with cyberpunk, you're always going to um, fight either the government, which is typically fascistic and dystopian, or corporations, which are very corrupt and evil. Um, for me, at least for this book, I wanted to target corporations and the kind of breadth of how they control us in terms of our bodies. Sleeplessness is very clear about that. It's human bodies functioning 24/7, like, and corporations being able to use those bodies 24/7. But also, I wanted to explore, at least, without giving too much away, how corporations also can dominate person's mind and their consciousness and everything that they think of in terms of, like, how what data goes in and out of their minds. So you know, these are things that I'm always interested about. This is why I write cyberpunk, but also very scary things because they're happening. They're here.
Yeah, there's one scene, I guess, where Elliot finds Jamie and Jamie's going like, well, how'd you find me? And he's going like, duh. Like if
Eh,
you're in China and you run away, they can find you like in 30 seconds.
yeah.
And then he at one point he also asks, is this deep fake? And they say, no, it isn't. But then I'm thinking, you can't tell.
You can't really know anymore. Deepfake technology is something that
It's
personally
scary.
is fascinating and also very scary to me. I think um, it's something that people just are aware of, and, like, at the back of their mind, they're probably thinking this is kind of a technology that could have very serious insidious applications. Um, but I think because it's gained prominence in the last 2 3 years or so, our attentions are just divided in terms of, like, harmful technologies or, like, horrible things about the world in general. But I honestly think deepfakes are something to be wary about in terms of technology that's here now, or that's going to be even more widespread in the near future.
Yeah, it's like people your age and younger. I think the basic premise they live their lives by is that they are in glass houses and they can throw stones because they don't have any expectation of privacy. And if you go back to what Jamie does after he finds Simon, then he goes back in the office. I mean, we can do that. I mean, I could have cameras in your room right now, and there's no way you would know it, or a drone the size of a bumblebee. And I think most kids, as I call them, don't really care. They recognize this is a life they have to live where everything is known.
Right. And the problem with that is, or at least one of the problems that I see about it is, it's mostly left unexamined, right? If it's especially if you're talking about teenagers and children, if this is something that they take as fact, if they take the erosion of their privacy as a way of life, then what does that lead to? All right. It leads to, in the future, people just being more and more comfortable just revealing everything that probably isn't to their benefit revealing, private medical information. These are things that people, number one, share in apps or websites, even like, um, medical websites or medical provider apps. You provide them without really thinking, okay, well, what are the privacy rules of this app? Nobody really reads those, but that's so critical. And that's for adults. But if children are now kind of used to that, they probably wouldn't be thinking in the future like, oh yeah, this random corporation wants to ask if I have a family history of X, Y, and Z. Sure, let me tell you. Again, the problem is it's mostly left unexamined, right? What are the harms here? And that's something that hopefully we as a society can untangle pretty soon.
Yeah, and it's funny because here we are, both of us attorneys, and yet when's the last time you read a 10-page terms and conditions?
No,
You
I
just
don't remember.
no, and you just check the box. I
Right,
agree.
right,
And
and it's also hard to just completely um, just not use these websites, not use these like programs or apps, because they do make your life easier, they do make communications faster, there is a clear benefit, at least to me, of using these things. But I think it's more about being more conscious about, okay, what are the risks here and am I okay with those risks? And I don't think that calculus is something, I think that calculus is something that we could all be better at deciding.
yeah, there was a one of the I say I'm 70 years old, so I can say this. One of the girls that works for me, and they are because they're 15 to 18 years old. She's not on TikTok because she goes, I don't want to be part of the algorithm. It's
Mhm.
just like she just said it like that, and you realize also, it used to be a meme was like a virus. Now, if you talk to some kid, everything's a meme. There's nothing that isn't a meme, which is a meme in itself in a meta sense.
No, absolutely. And with TikTok especially, the memes are so fast and they change by the day. Whatever most of TikTok is doing right now, whatever dance craze they're into, or whatever book or movie they're raving or ranting about, is different from the one tomorrow or from the one yesterday. And it's just this constant churn of people reacting and giving, again, information about their interests, information about themselves to to an app that's owned by a corporation that's based in China, who have a spotty like human rights record. So I personally was on TikTok a few months back because I wanted to see what this technology is. I wanted to see what the app is about, and I found myself honestly a little bit addicted because it, it's set up, it functions in such a way where it's like popcorn. You can't stop. You can't stop watching these 10-second, 7-second videos. And it's scientifically like studied how this is the best way to retain someone's attention and um, to have them engage with the content. To, every time I like a video on TikTok, every time I comment on a video on TikTok, that's information that they're getting. And doing that like every 7 seconds, because they can grab my attention in those 7 seconds and get a quick reaction from me. In the span of 30 minutes, they've gotten so much from me, and I thought, oh, I was just like idling away. But that's not entirely true. That's not exactly just me idling away. It's me giving valuable input, or input that is valuable to some corporation out there, that I might not want knowing my information. So yeah, I deleted TikTok because I realized, wow, I lost an hour of my life liking these things. And some software engineers in China are probably like, aggregating that and using that to make the algorithm stronger and make me more addicted. So
Yeah,
delete.
that's the amazing thing, is how they can drill down. I mean,
Yeah.
like the more you look at this, the more you're going to look at this, the more you're going to look at it. And, that's one of the things in the book. It's like the protagonists, and there's several, and they're all involved in different aspects and have different viewpoints as to what's happening for either their own personal interest or maybe selfless interests. But they keep things kind of close to their vest. And there's a certain aspect of something they don't want to get out at all. And for the most part, actually, they're successful, aren't they?
Well, yes, they are, but that's mostly because of who these characters are. I think I had the advantage of using a journalist, or journalists, several of them in the story, and they're reputed for privacy, or at least probably being more cautious about their privacy than your average citizen, right? We have people who are engaged in a little bit of corporate espionage. So obviously they want to use burner phones, be offline as much as they can, or, not compromise the mission by going online, or avoiding surveillance cameras by using certain tools or techniques. So that definitely made my job easier in terms of like having people who are invested in keeping their privacy. I think it might have been a little more interesting, if, now that you mention it, if I had someone who isn't, or who is on the opposite end of the spectrum, and what that would look like.
It's funny because I just thought about it. You kind of had to go back into the past a little bit to keep the plot moving appropriately. Because if you went too far into the future, then everybody would know everything. So you had to
Yeah,
kind of do it. You know what I mean?
yeah, and it was it's interesting because this is the first novel I've ever drafted, and so I definitely gave myself a lot to chew on in terms of structuring it, and the timeline, because mysteries have to be tight in terms of their timeline, right? Like, you have to place every character in the right place and time. You have to be aware of where everybody is and what everybody is doing. But also, I wanted to make life difficult for myself by um, doing flashbacks, by doing a lot of backstory, not just about the pandemic and sleeplessness and how that developed, but also about how CMP developed as a company, and how Jamie um, gained all these like horrible life experiences that led him to make the decisions that he makes. Uh, so yeah, it's interesting that you mention me going back into the past and like playing with the timeline a little bit, because as I was revising this, I was literally pulling my hair out thinking, why did I do this to myself? Could have been a straight murder mystery, but I had to make it hard.
Did you have a either a real or virtual type bulletin board like they do in the TV shows where you had lines and stuff like that going here and there?
I definitely had a lot of post-it notes on this wall right here. None of the string lines that like murderers use in like serial killer shows, but it was pretty close. Eventually, it became too cumbersome. I had to move to digital and do a spreadsheet. But yeah, definitely it was a lot of like analog and digital tools just to keep everything together and coherent.
Isn't it funny how the analog aspect of life somehow seems more real still? Like if you have the post-its on the wall, yeah, and here I am looking at my desktop, and I theoretically have a folder and a piece of paper, you know, but I don't. But I've accepted that it actually is a folder. But then when you have a real folder or you have a post-it, somehow, notwithstanding all the authors I've interviewed who think virtual reality is real reality, somehow it still seems more real, whether it's that or whether it's vinyl or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. When I have to write myself a reminder, I still use Post-its. I still use notepads. But that's me. I am almost in my 40s, and other people who are younger than me probably act different. But for me, if I need to remind myself, if I need to keep something top of mind, it's still going to be pen and paper.
It's funny because I was on the phone with someone who was probably in their early 20s, some service person, and I said, "Can you give me your number?" And she says, "Sure." I said, "Wait, let me get a pencil and paper." And she goes, "Why would you do that? Just write it down in notes." It's like I was a complete idiot, which I was, and I didn't have a pencil. I would have to go downstairs and get it. It's like,
Right.
how stupid can you be? I have the device in my hand.
Right. I've definitely had to, um, you know, because you're a lawyer too.
Oh,
The
yeah.
court system is still heavily reliant on paper. Like some courts aren't as digital as others. So, sometimes I would go for my day job and I have to copy something from the the court calendar, and I'm whipping out a notepad and a pen instead of just like taking my phone and taking a photo like most people do. And yeah, I had a colleague once say like, just take a photo with your phone, why are you writing it down?
I know. It's like um, still requiring signatures on various legal documents and other documents. DocuSign is so much more private. It's so much more accurate. It's so much more secure. But yet, if you sign a if you get a personal financial statement to a bank, they require it to be signed.
Like
And
ink
each time you
signatures,
send,
yeah.
and each time you send a new one, they require it to sign it.
Yeah, I don't know. So some courts definitely have to catch up. So the federal system's getting better, but a lot of courts
Yeah,
still.
yeah. Mostly, I'm doing the ECF systems, and the other thing is, here's an off topic question.
Mhm.
Thinking about you doing immigration law and all. So, like in this past 6 years, don't you feel like really depressed?
It's been a tough road. Worked. I've been working as an immigration lawyer for about 10 years now. So, I was there during the Obama years and the Trump years, and now Biden. A lot of good things have happened in the last couple of years since um, Joe Biden took office. Still, a lot needs to be fixed, but the 4 years prior to that was absolute hell. Not just for me in terms of work, because nothing was getting done, because the agencies basically have shut down in terms of like their willingness to serve the general public. um, but it's just been hell for my clients, the people that I serve, who are the immigrants who are just trying to settle and kind of work out their immigration status and make sure that they can legally stay and work in the country and not be picked up by ICE and put on a plane. As much as it's been a difficult road for me during the Trump years, it was a lot worse for my clients. We weathered it, and there were a lot of losses during those last 4 years personally, and like to the system as a whole. But at least now things are looking up.
Are you still emotionally tied to all this, or have you like divorced yourself from? Because I still have problems with that, and I never had an unlisted number, and my divorce clients would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, arguing about who was going to get the Tupperware. But
Oh, yeah, no, I'm familiar with that. I do get the odd phone calls at all times of the day, and I feel like I can't really enjoy what I do if I can switch myself off from it. A lot of, and this is me, everybody has their own like way of being a lawyer, or of helping other people in their work. But for me, I need that emotional connection, and that's not something that I can just sever. And I think not severing it makes me better at my job, makes me more impassioned. It stresses me out more, and
Yeah.
the line between work and home gets blurred sometimes. And but that's something that I've learned to enjoy and value. I think on the whole, it's better than bad.
Well, it's funny because you talk about passion, and then now I'm kind of understanding a little bit more about the central concept of the book is like, okay, so I had a passion in what I did in the law. The medical negligence was fascinating because you always learned something new. And generally there was someone you felt, because you turn away 9 out of 10 cases,
Right.
yeah, so I had a passion. So I'm wondering, what if I didn't sleep? What if you didn't sleep? Would you spend 24 hours a day trying to help people?
I probably would still do my job. I'd still be a lawyer. I really love what I do. And, now that I'm embarking on this kind of second new career as a writer, um, people ask me, and I still say, you know, if I didn't, if I wasn't a writer, I would still be doing the law. I would still be doing immigration law. I would still be serving these communities because it's something that I really feel passionately about. But, if I were sleepless, I'd probably, you know, devote 8 hours, hopefully, to my writing career, writing a new book. But yeah, I don't see myself like it's not in something that I can just abandon. It's the writing is not like my second act. I think law is something I want to do for the rest of my life. At least for now. I am young, so I don't know.
Yeah. And it's true. You're living another third of a life. So, but the biggest suspension of disbelief, to play devil's advocate
Hmm.
here, would be that, notwithstanding the fact that you're not sleeping, it seemed to me, and notwithstanding the fact that there's no deleterious effects physically with regard to this
Hmm.
situation, wouldn't you still feel like there was, fatigue, or like when like when someone got drunk in the book, you pass out,
Right,
whatever.
right.
But wouldn't you feel like, one, you'd still get really tired, and two, would you miss, or would your life be different because you're not dreaming?
Right. Well, so for fatigue, uh, you know, these folks still feel muscle strain. Like if you've been walking 12 hours of the day, like you would feel that regardless of whether or not you slept, right? So yes, they probably do experience fatigue more and you know more regularly in their lives. I think that's a little bit unexplored in the book, the physical just strain to your muscle, to the way you move, which I think you know is is a choice I made because I wanted to focus on the mental side of things. As you were saying, like what about if you don't dream anymore, right? Or how does that affect just your mental health, which is something that's amplified when you're dealing with a character like Jamie, who has mental health issues, who is dealing with a traumatic loss, or at least in the book, a couple of traumatic losses. Um, so, you know, when when you ask me what about what is it like, or like what are the effects of not dreaming, well, that's something that's kind of explored in the book. I don't want to spoil it, but I think it does for some people present a less rich and vivid life experience in general. Like, dreams are, at least for me, kind of provide uh, a little bit of a creative well. I get a lot of ideas and I get a lot of sensations and just like snippets of just thoughts when I wake up. And those are from dreams, and that's from our brains like reconstituting our experiences. And when you're sleepless, you don't really get that. And the book kind of goes into that um, to varying degrees. And I hope I provided a satisfactory answer to that question.
Yeah, it's a tough one because, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But yeah, if dreams are like a consolidation of the day, as
Yeah.
far as putting it away in either a box if you're kind of a strange person, not strange, if you're kind of a closeted person, mixing metaphors, or just leaving it out there. And that would be something you would explore. And then also memory, which again, and I'm going to say it, but Jamie has a situation. There are other situations. There could be a third situation with regarding memory. But the really good thing as we conclude is that for my bookstore and for book clubs and things like that, the cool thing about a good novel is that when you're done with it, you're not really done with it. So here I am asking, well, what is this? What is this? That's my job now. You're done.
Right.
It's my work. And if someone, why didn't he, my book club, I call it Fight Club. So if you're sitting on either side, it's like, why didn't he do that? Well, he didn't do that because it wasn't necessary to include that. Yeah, but if he included that, then, and then you go on and you go, I wonder what happens now. You will actually, in your book, yes, you do wonder what happens now. And I think that's the mark of a good book, is it doesn't leave you. You don't just put it down, like a rom-com or a beach read or something like that. But you do have questions in your own mind, like, what if this happened? And what about these things that we don't know about? I think that's cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely wanted, the book to end on a note that still left some questions. I wanted this book to wrap up nicely, and answer all the big questions, but to leave the reader with like more possibilities that they can explore in their own thought experiments. This book started out as thought experiment for me, and now, like, by the end of reading The Sleepless, I hope the reader will have like, okay, now what?
That's a good explanation and a good way to end it. So thanks, Victor. And the book is The Sleepless. I thought it was going to be released on August 2nd, and I've forgotten the date.
It's August 23rd.
Okay, so like I said, it'll be on the front table in the bookstore, Wellington Square Bookshop, August 23rd. And look forward to talking to you again, or when it goes into paperback.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. So long.
Bye.